Hey there, friends, and welcome to episode 345 of Just the Zoo of Us. This week, I am joined by a journalist and writer for a bit of a story time. Our guest's career has taken her all over the world, from the forests of India to the highways of rural America, where she's experienced kind of both ends of the spectrum of human relationships to nature. She's been a part of busting wildlife trafficking rings and abuse, and she's seen communities join forces to protect and preserve their native species. Her stories include a population of lions brought back from near extinction, a guided tour of a crime campus, a tiger attack, emails from Joe Exotic, gas station pizza influencing entire new laws, a Hollywood celebrity cougar, and so much more. There is true crime, there's drama, there's heartwarming moments. I was totally in awe throughout this entire conversation, and I am so thrilled to share it with you. Just the Zoo of Us presents Conservation Stories from Sharon Guynup. Hi there, everybody. It's Ellen Weatherford with Just the Zoo of Us, your favorite animal review podcast. I am so excited. We have a brand new friend to talk to on the show. This is Sharon Guynup. Say hi, Sharon.
Hello.
Sharon, I am so excited to talk to you because you have probably one of the most fascinating careers. You know, I get to talk to so many awesome people on this show that have had just really spectacular careers doing really fascinating, interesting things. And I feel like, as we were talking before, you have had some of the most incredible journeys and had some fascinating travels and amazing stories from your career. You are a journalist and a writer who has been involved in wildlife and conservation stories all over the world. How did you get involved in this career?
Well, thank you, Ellen. It's a delight to be speaking with you here today. I started out as a photographer. I was a photojournalist from the age of 16 to mid-career when I went to graduate school and studied both science and journalism. So I jumped departments. I still shoot, do video. I like public speaking. I love teaching people about the wild world and the environment in whatever form is necessary at this point in time. So there's a lot of different platforms. As you noted, I have had a lot of fun out in the wide world, even in tough situations. What really gives me hope is that I'm working with incredible scientists, incredible conservationists, whether it's in Africa. I've spent a lot of time working in India. I've had a chance to travel extensively and see phenomenal efforts to make our world better. Again, whether it's dealing with wildlife conservation, ecosystems, trying to address pollution issues. There's a lot of people out there that are doing great work. And especially now when there's so many challenges, I think that that's not only what keeps me going, but I think it's important to focus on in general.
Especially when you are really entrenched in wildlife and conservation and nature-focused things. It can feel like a little bit of a doom parade. You can get so inundated, I think, with bad news, because there is a lot of bad news. And I think it can be very helpful to be reminded of the fact that, like, there's people out there doing work that is having lasting impacts.
On my whiteboard above my desk, I wrote the phrase, narrow your focus.
Ooh.
And I did that about 1.5 years ago, and it reminds me to stay in my lane, to focus on the things that I know that I can make a difference about. For an example, I'm currently a contributing editor, launched a wildlife desk at Manga Bay. And every editor is given, a certain slate of stories to produce each year. And for me, there's a wide variety. I'm working on wildlife trade stories. That's tough stuff.
Yeah.
Thousands of species are being, poached and traded into, near extinction. And even the legal trade is really heavy, legally trading animals towards the edge. So that's tough. But if you look at the work that so many people are doing to try to change this trajectory, to put the kingpins in jail, the people, the masterminds, the head of cartels that are head of these industries, it's tough work. It's crime. It's dangerous. On the flip side, I'm working on wildlife corridors, which is the joy of my life. I want to go into a quick soliloquy here. With the creation of the world's first national park, which was Yellowstone in 1872, it became obvious that the world needed to protect watersheds and forest areas and different ecosystems, both for people and for wildlife. So that's been the conservation MO since then. You save important land areas. And that continues to be crucial. But now, on a planet with 8.2 billion people that's sliced and diced by everything we can imagine, it's really important to recreate wildlife corridors that allow animals to move the way they need to, whether it's migration, looking for food, water, a mate, or escaping increasingly common weather events, extreme weather, floods, droughts, wildfire. So it is now a new 21st century conservation paradigm that's happening across the globe. So producing stories on reconnecting habitat is just sheer joy. It's making a difference, and it's global, and it's happening regardless of politics. Funding is both public and private. It's fabulous. It's just fabulous.
We're going to talk a little bit more about the wildlife corridors later. I would really like to lean into those. I would first like to rewind for just a minute to talk about Manga Bay, because that is how you and I were connected, was by getting in touch with Manga Bay, which just getting in touch with Manga Bay was huge for me, by the way. I've been a Manga Bay reader for years, and I was really excited to be able to be in touch with the team and put together a collaborative episode. For people who maybe are listening and are not familiar with Manga Bay, could you describe a little bit what Manga Bay is all about?
Manga Bay does environmental coverage around the world. We have bureaus across the world. There's a bureau in Indonesia. There's a bureau in India. There's a Brazil bureau. There's a South American and African bureau, etc., etc. We publish in 8 languages. In many of those parts of the world where they're working in the local language, there's very little comprehensive environmental coverage. So it's really important. And actually, most of our audience isn't in the United States. One of many things that makes me proud to work for Manga Bay is the fact that there is serious attention to accuracy. We both have copy editors and fact checkers if need be. We really go over our work and make sure we're putting out important factual stories and the kinds of coverage that we don't often see in many outlets anymore. The push in journalism is for short, quick stories that are mostly the news with very little context. And so many of the environmental issues that we face now are deeply complicated. And context is important. And looking at things from different perspectives that we normally don't see is really important. I'll give you one example. Some years back, when I was a freelancer, I worked for Manga Bay for about 10 years as a freelancer. There was one story I produced with editor Glenn Scherer on how animals that were disappearing from landscapes were physically impacting those landscapes because there were seed dispersers. And with them gone, certain trees, plants weren't regenerating as they should. For example, people don't think of elephants as a seed disperser, but they eat a lot of fruit, they eat a lot of trees, there may be nuts involved, and they travel long distances. So they're a crucial seed disperser. And, look at what happened in the last 2 decades in Africa with poaching for ivory, and have really, really diminished the numbers of elephants. So that actually impacts the landscape. So these broader stories that you'd never see as a news story add to the public knowledge about why conservation matters.
Right, because it's hard to make a punchy title out of a very slow and gradual shift that's been happening over decades, right? Where there's not a single current event you could point to but it's something that people still need to know is happening, right? But it's hard to turn that into like a traditional, news headline.
That's where featured stories come in. Ever since the time when we sat around campfires and told stories, it was always about storytelling. And that's key, I think, in getting public attention at this point, because attention spans have gotten quite short. So if we can engage the public in a narrative about an animal, about a researcher, about a landscape, but something where there's a main character and you're telling a story.
A hero's journey.
Yeah. I think that's how we can help engage the public.
And you have had a chance to work on some really fascinating stories. I would like to kind of share some on some of the stories that you have been involved with reporting on and writing about. And the first story is about the Asiatic lion. Could you introduce us to the story of the Asiatic lion?
Actually, that story is in the current June edition of National Geographic magazine, and it's also online. So, we being my husband, National Geographic photographer Steve Winter, and I discovered that there are Asiatic lions in India. Most people don't realize that there is another subspecies of lion. We only know about African lions. But there is one last population of Asiatic lions in Gujarat, India, which is western central India. It's on the Arabian Sea. And this animal once ranged from northern Africa across the northern Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, Persia, all the way to eastern India. Now there's one population left. And about a century ago, there were only a couple of dozen, and no numbers are exact at this point. But with incredible conservation efforts, India has brought back these lions literally from the brink of extinction.
Wow.
There are now almost 900 as of the 2025 census.
From double digits?
Couple of dozen to 900. One really interesting thing about this is it highlights how conservation efforts never end. You're never there. It's never truly a success story, even if it is. And this is an incredible success story. But now, with 900 lions, the protected areas are full. Prides of lions are moving out into landscapes with people that haven't lived with them in 100 years.
And maybe would rather their backyards not be full of lions.
Yeah. And so this brings next level challenges, right? So I think, conservation is a process, and it was really incredible to spend time, in those dry forests with this animal. I think one of the big issues beyond where do you find habitat for this growing population of apex predators that live in prides, but also they're all in one part of India on the Arabian Sea, an area that's been heavily impacted by climate change, intense heat. It's also an area that's hit by cyclones. So all the eggs are in one basket. And there's been a legal push for more than a decade to move one population to another state that's been resisted by the Gujarati state government. The Gujarati government has invested so much time and energy bringing these lions back that they would like to keep them in Gujarat. So it's been an ongoing issue.
Every time we've talked about things that are like apex predators, right? These sort of like keystone species, because they're so high up on the sort of food. It's not a food pyramid. I know a food pyramid is like a nutrition thing.
Food chain.
But, but like they sit at the top of it, right? And that implies that they require a stable base to stand on, right? Like they need a very stable and healthy ecosystem to be able to grow and thrive in these populations. So it takes a lot, right? You have to kind of work from the ground up to make a habitat that these predators can live in. So, I mean, I'm curious about what those efforts have looked like for the Gujarat government. What kind of actions they had to take to be able to let those lions come back.
The Gujarati Forest Department has used a broad palette of conservation efforts to bring these lions back. Everything from community programs that provide real incentive for local people to want to protect lions. Anything from bringing electricity to villages, bringing better water supplies to a drought-prone area at the end of the dry season before monsoon hits. It's desiccated. It's really dry. Cutting grasslands in protected areas and giving that grass to local people for their livestock during monsoon when it's hard to get feed. So there's many education, all kinds of programs. So those are some incentives, but they've also really beefed up enforcement. There has not been a poaching incident in Gujarat, in Gir National Forest area, for more than a decade. And I don't know if there's any place on Earth where there's a marketable species that can say that.
That requires not just prevention, but also like deterrence, right? Like you have to respond to it when it does happen, but also you have to like get out in front of it to make sure that it doesn't happen. Because you can't unpoach a lion, right? Like you can't, like responding after the fact is like, well, the damage has been done, but also being so proactive about like addressing the problems that caused it in the first place.
I think one of the really important programs for prevention has been a Gujarati Forest Department program that hires one person in each village as eyes and ears. And that's not just to prevent poaching, but it also offers an alert if lions are coming near so that guards can come in and try to move lions away from a village. So it's public safety, it's lion safety, it's effective.
And also like connecting people to each other, right? Like also connecting the communities to each other and letting people work together, not just work together as communities, but also work together between communities, like not just within the community, but also like between communities so that they can say like, hey, there's lions over here, keep an eye out. That is a really interesting predator conflict avoidance technique, I think.
It's important, and it's incorporated in many different forms in other parts of the world. But let's face it, these people are living with apex predators, and there is a safety issue. Not only does safety need to be addressed for people to coexist with lions, but it also has to be worthwhile. There needs to be some economic benefit for living with a dangerous or damaging animal. I mean, elephants go through and rip up farm fields, right? It's dangerous living around big cats.
You need buy-in.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be incentive, and they've effectively done that in India, in Gujarat.
Hey there, we are going to take a quick break to hear from our friends on the Maximum Fun Network. When we get back, the stakes get quite a bit higher, so stick around.
In 2026, our comedy podcast, Sawbones, is one of the most reputable sources for medical information. Does that make me feel great? No.
No, me neither. But I do like to think we're doing our part in making sure that we're fighting the pseudoscientific misinformation that has pervaded modern society.
Yeah, but we're doing our part over here on Sawbones every week, a marital tour of misguided medicine. It's not all serious stuff. We're still getting into all the wild, weird ways we used to try to heal people over the years, but we're also trying to keep tabs on the evolving situation.
Yeah, we can talk about drinking raw milk and eating mummies. It's Sawbones.
That's right. It's Sawbones. It's every Tuesday, and it's on MaximumFun.org or wherever you get a podcast these days.
On Judge John Hodgman, the courtroom is fake, but the disputes are real.
Brian would say, I'm the Gumby of this family. He's just not.
Claiming to be Gumby is an un-Gumby-like claim.
No, it's just Gumby and I being our authentic selves.
So what's your complaint? Too many sauces?
There are no foods on which to put the sauces.
Have we named all the sauces on the top shelf yet? Not even close. You economize when it comes to pants.
Truly, it's not about the cleanliness of the pants.
Well, why isn't it? This is what I want to know. Judge John Hodgman, fake court, weird cases, real justice. On MaximumFun.org, YouTube, and everywhere you get podcasts.
Staying on the topic of big cats, another huge story that you have worked on that, as we were talking about this before we were recorded, my like jaw was on the floor as you were telling me about this story, because this is such an interesting like conversion of wildlife issues and conservation issues and like weirdly true crime, like has a weirdly true crime angle to it. Could you tell me about the tiger temples?
Well, there were two such stories I worked on. I'll talk first about the tiger temple, and then I would love to talk about U.S. tigers. But let's start with Tiger Temple.
Which is crazy, by the way. I know people who had Netflix during the pandemic lockdown are like getting flashbacks.
We'll get to that. So Steve Winter and I did a tiger book for National Geographic that came out in late 2013. And I was contacted by a conservationist in Australia, Sybil Foxcroft, who had been at the Tiger Temple doing research for a master's thesis on Indo-Chinese tigers and observed wildlife trafficking. She kept seeing cubs disappear, other animals appear, and she started looking into it. She had to leave. She was actually threatened and kind of in danger. But she reached out and told me that if we worked together, we could prove that there was illegal wildlife trafficking going on at the Tiger Temple, which is a Buddhist monastery that claimed to be a sanctuary for tigers. Now, it was also a $3 million a year tourist attraction where people could pet cubs, feed cubs bottles, walk with tigers, really up close and personal. So we spent a year, and towards the end of that time, Steve and Sybil and I went to Thailand. She couldn't go to the Tiger Temple because they knew her.
Oh, they know your face.
They knew her.
You're on that, like, you know how, like, at the bar, they'll have, like, pictures of people where they're, like,
yep.
They have, like, a band list.
Yep, that was her.
Oh, man.
So Steve and I went in one day as tourists and photographed and took notes, and then we revealed ourselves as journalists, and they took us around, and they thought that we were doing a story that would help them because they'd been under so much criticism.
Oh, they think you're, like, influencers.
Yeah.
They think that you're, like, there to do an Instagram reel or something. Like that. Like... So, get ready with me to go walk with the tigers at the Tiger Temple.
It was a little before that, but this was 2016. But yeah, they took us all around, and they'd been under scrutiny for years. You know, people were like wondering how there could be so many tigers there and no malfeasance. There was 172 tigers there at that time. And there were the ones out front that were with tourists, and then we slipped into the back, and then they took us into the back. What were they thinking? And it was... It was a prison-like situation, sometimes with, I don't know, a dozen tigers in one cage, cement floors, filthy, et cetera, et cetera.
They're like, this is where we do our crimes. Do you want to come see the crime room?
Yeah,
we'll take you back there.
Well, we'll show you the animal abuse. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll show you we have a whole room for it. We'll get you back there.
Well, it's a whole complex, really.
We'll take you to the crime complex.
There you go.
Campus.
That's it. So Sybil and I had been able to cultivate an inside source. So when we were in Thailand that time, we met with him in a safe house and interviewed him on camera. We had to change his voice and blur out his face, and he supplied us with documents proving cross-border trade with tiger farms in Laos. Tiger farms are places that literally grow tigers to ship off into the illegal wildlife trade. It's focused in Asia, and the largest consumer is China. And the main products are tiger skins, which are often used in luxury home decor, the canines, which are fashioned into jewelry, and the bones, which are used in tiger bone wine, which is both considered medicinal, but also a way to flaunt prestige and power because it's against the law, in theory, to import tigers.
It's a wealth It's a wealth indicator. It's a flex.
It truly is. I mean, whenever people are like, well, it's traditional medicine, all I say is, yeah, but it truly is a luxury trade, high end. Long story short, we published that story in National Geographic in January. Within 4 months, under incredible pressure, both from inside Thailand and globally, the Forest Department officials went in, confiscated the tigers, and shut it down.
Wow.
And what they found there was true Island of Dr. Moreau gruesome. There were tiger cubs in formaldehyde in bottles for sale. Those same bottles with the same logo were tracked to Vietnam, for example. There were cubs in the freezer. There were lion skins all over. There was tiger skin jewelry, bracelets, all kinds of things, necklaces. And there was even a tiger skin on the wall in the abbot's home.
And this was all under the guise of being a sanctuary, right?
And it was at a Buddhist monastery.
Oh, man.
It was dark.
Yeah.
It was really dark. And it was so much worse than we even knew. And we knew it was bad. But when the officials went in and found what they found, it put me in a funk for a couple of weeks. It didn't feel like a victory to me. It's dark.
It's not a feel-good story.
On the flip side, though, it was a kind of blackfish moment for hands-on wildlife attractions, especially, cats. I don't know if you've ever seen a baby tiger up close, but they are adorable. Without
really
knowing.
They look so huggable.
Yes.
They look really pettable.
So without knowing what's going on in the background, who wouldn't want to hold one, right?
Yeah.
But, there's this dark background. And unfortunately, we learned way too much about that.
Right.
So prior to the Tiger Temple, I wasn't really focused on any captive animal issues. I always covered wildlife in the wild ecosystems. But the Tiger Temple showed me something that I didn't know before. And I was at a conference giving a talk about wild tigers. And there was a woman, Carson Barilak, who worked for the nonprofit IFAW, who did a talk on U.S. tigers. And there was a line that blew my mind. She told us that there was more tigers living in cages in the United States than there were left in the wild in Asia.
That is crazy.
So that launched a 2-year investigation Steve and I did for National Geographic. Steve ended up going to 32 states. Me, not quite so many. Maybe it was only about 16 for me. But we went to these roadside zoos that had tiger cub petting. Many of them were registered as nonprofits and called themselves rescues, but they were not. And many of them were involved in illegal wildlife trade. The trade in the U.S. is very different. In Asia, it goes into a black market. Here in the U.S., it was cross-state trade to supply cubs for these venues, because you have to have cubs for people to pet.
Yeah, once they get too big, then it's too dangerous, or people would way rather pet a cub.
Well, the line is about, they always say 3 months. I got to know the sizes and knew how big the cubs were that were being handled in various situations. But I learned firsthand how dangerous they really can be. Steve was photographing a family sitting on a couch in someone's home. This was a smaller scale petting operation. And there was a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old kid. They each took turns, feeding the cub a bottle. The cub was about 12 weeks. His name was Hulk. And after he was done with the second bottle, he jumped onto the coffee table, jumped onto the floor, and scratched up my son, who was shooting video. He's an adult. And then came behind me and wrapped his paws around me and dug 5-inch gashes into my thighs and held on.
Oh my God.
The owner had to come and peel him off and, nervously joking. It's like, oh, kitties, they're playful.
Okay.
Meanwhile, this cub had just been on a 5-year-old's lap.
I cannot fathom, having a 5-year-old and just that is unfathomable to me. Putting a 5-year-old in that situation in the first place. Unthinkable.
Oh, if you went to any of the big venues, there's hordes.
When you got into like writing and journalism, were you thinking, oh, surely this is not the career field where I'm going to be attacked by a tiger?
I guess I hadn't projected quite that far ahead.
This seems like a pretty tiger attack proof career.
Well, although, I was working out in the wild and, in really remote places with biologists. So, that wasn't always the safest either, but it was a different kind of danger.
And yet it's right in an American living room where you get actually attacked by a tiger.
So this is where I have to bring up the other part. One of the most notorious venues in the U.S. was Joe Exotic's place in Oklahoma. We spent a great deal of time there, probably at least 4 visits as tourists. Joe was already in hiding because the feds were after him. But
did he take you to his crime room too?
No, but there was I had accumulated all kinds of pictures and video and Instagram posts and Facebook and had quite a trail of illegal activity. When he was finally arrested for, 2 murder...
Everything. For every crime, weirdly, turns out.
Well,
every possible crime.
Wildlife trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. But, more importantly, the big charges were, 2 counts of murder for hire to try to kill Carol Baskin, who was trying to expose his really horrible breeding and trafficking and animal abuse activities. So Joe and I connected, and
not being on a first name basis.
Yeah, good old Joe Exotic. I communicated with Joe via email in jail for 6 months and had a few phone calls. And it was always such an almost like electric rush when I'd find an email in my inbox. It was like, because we played cat and mouse. He kept giving me a little, but not enough. He actually, through channels, had someone send me 1,000 photographs off of his cell phone. Which
fantastic.
I don't know. How, don't even begin to ask like
what treasure trove.
Which I was really nervous to look at because he had quite a colorful history, shall we say, that outside of the tiger business, but an
active social life.
Yeah. There were some things I couldn't unsee, let's put it that way.
Oh my God. I know those emails. I know the spelling in those emails was crazy.
That's a thing.
I know there was a lot of caps lock involved.
I also attended Joe Exotic's federal trial in Oklahoma City, and I went back for the sentencing, even though the story was done and I didn't have any more travel funding. After going through this whole story for 2 years, 18 months undercover, 6 months not, I had to physically be there to see the closure. I had to see the rest of it. So the story came out in the December 2019 issue of National Geographic magazine. 3 months later, lockdown happened, and Netflix came out with a docudrama that featured Joe Exotic. So Steve and I were on a lot of different podcasts and panels, and then it was about 2 years later, the U.S. Congress passed a new law, the Big Cat Public Safety Act, that prohibited hands-on contact and private ownership of big cats in every state across the country. And there had not been a federal law up to that point. And we were credited with influence over that.
That's amazing. I mean, yes, it is a heavy and messy and chaotic story, and I'm certain a lot to go through. How did it feel, though, like having that kind of outcome that was sort of like tied directly to something you had done?
Well, there were many, many days that we'd be in some part of rural America where many of these venues were situated, and there would be a very low-end motel that was the only place to stay, and the only food would be, a gas station store. Boy, pizza's good out of gas station pizza's really good, let me tell you.
Roller dogs and Doritos.
Living high. And I'd sit on my bed in that motel and put my head in my hands after showering off the dust and the filth and the stink, and just sit there. And Oh, it was tough. It was tough to see animals undergoing such suffering because the conditions they lived in were abhorrent. They had like fly bites and sores, and they were skinny or way too fat, or, and then to see these cubs that pulled from their mother at birth and passed around, day after day when they should be sleeping and fed poorly and, on and on and on. It was ugly. And to get that call from Carson Barilak at 8:00 one night in December 2022 that said, it passed. It was a late session and it passed. And she heard from staffers that the magazine made a difference. And the reason it did is because Nat Geo Society, the nonprofit arm, gave a copy to every member of Congress. And if you think about who looks at bills first, congressional staffers are young people, often just out of college. And looking at pictures in Nat Geo is a lot more interesting than reading a bill. Right?
Right.
So, I actually credit Steve even more than me in changing minds about the importance of this.
No, I think it's a joint effort. It's
Of course. Wait.
Listen, you were both sitting on those motel beds, okay?
Yes, we were. Yeah. So sometimes our work has big impact as journalists, but sometimes it simply educates the public on something they need to know about. And that's really important too. And then there's another layer. It's really important to educate the next generation. And I think for that reason, both Steve and I have mentored young photographers, young writers for years and years. And a couple of years ago, we did a book called The Ultimate Book of Big Cats that was, targeted at middle school. And in some ways, I feel that that's the most important project I ever worked on.
I feel like as a kid who grew up with a lot of animal books, there's probably a lot of kids out there who that set the foundation for a life alongside conservation and working towards making the world a better place for wildlife and nature. Things like that can really lay the groundwork for someone to build off of in their life and have those big impacts.
A couple of friends' kids have told me that when their kids got that book, they were completely obsessed. There was one 6-year-old boy who wouldn't go to bed without reading something in the book.
Aww.
And, that's what I want to hear. I want to hear that people of any age, they care about the natural world. They care about the planet that we all share, the planet that sustains us all, and everything that lives on it. Right. So that's truly my goal. It's Steve's goal. And I am so fortunate to spent my entire adult lifetime working with Steve, collaborating, brainstorming, working together when we can. But even when we're not, we still can brainstorm over important stories. It's such a gift.
I know having coffee in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table in the morning, I know it's popping off.
Well, I think at that point I'm drinking my Earl Grey tea and he's drinking his coffee and we're kind of, semi-conscious, but that's a whole other story.
As you mentioned, these wildlife trafficking stories and these stories of animal abuse and things, these things can all be really, really heavy and difficult to hear about, as important as they are. So we wanted to kind of, almost compliment sandwich it by ending on a story that, as you mentioned in the beginning, has been very uplifting and felt very motivating for you in a very positive way, which is talking about something that I do think does not get enough attention and people do not know enough about it, the wildlife corridors. And you have mentioned to me that you have got a chance to travel around the country, seeing some of the wildlife corridor efforts. Could you tell me a little bit about what that has been like?
Our awareness of this new paradigm, wildlife corridors, came about through a story that Steve was working on for National Geographic. He did a story on cougars in the U.S. only. I mean, they extend from Canada all the way through Latin America, but he focused on cougars that were being radio collared and studied in Wyoming, and then this urban population in Southern California. That population was really in danger. It was starting to show signs of inbreeding, kinked tails, other visible signs that the populations were really cut off from each other by everything that LA is, right? And he wanted to try to get a photo that showed a cat in its urban environment. So he had almost a vision of an image he wanted. He wanted to photograph a cougar under the Hollywood sign, just as an iconic image, because his grandparents lived out there. When he was a kid, he went out there, and there were cougars in Griffith Park, which is a really large, semi-wild park in LA, bigger than Central Park. It's really huge, and there's a lot of wildlife there, and there were cougars there when he was a kid. So he asked the biologist he was working with, a man named Jeff Sikich, so are there any, cougars in Griffith Park? I'd love to get a picture of one under the Hollywood sign. The biologist thought he was crazy and, went on. And then about 6 months later, he got a call from Jeff. There was a cat that had made it across 2 10-lane freeways and was in Griffith Park. Whew. So Steve camera trapped. It took 15 months, but he got that picture.
Wow. 15 months of work for one picture.
Well, there were camera traps. You're never going to see that animal, right?
Yeah.
And when that photograph ran in National Geographic, the cat became a celebrity in LA.
Yeah.
Everybody fell in love with this cat. And there was a permanent exhibit created at the Los Angeles County Natural History Museum. Urban wildlife was integrated into middle school curriculums. P22 Day, October 22nd, every year is kind of a P22, an environmental festival day in LA.
Can we get a better name for this cat than P22?
His name, it's P20, it's Puma 22. Cougars have a lot of names. They're mountain lions, pumas, cougar.
Let's put it to a vote. Let's let people be silly with it. We got to get a catchier name for this cat.
The most important outcome is that photograph sparked construction of what will be the world's largest wildlife overpass. And it's going to open on December 2nd. It crosses 10 lanes of the 101 freeway. And that is what made us aware of the need for wildlife passages. So many cats in Southern California are killed on those freeways trying to move the way cats need to move. They're wide-ranging animals, and they all need their own distinct territory. So we started working with the mastermind behind the overpass, Beth Pratt, who now heads the Wildlife Crossings Fund. And we have traveled somewhere between 14 and 17,000 miles in 4 trips around the U.S., looking at places where wildlife overpasses or underpasses have been built or retrofitted, and places that need them. In places like, Texas has done a great job. Florida, trying to protect the Florida panther, endangered species, created the Florida Wildlife Corridor and protected land and doing an amazing job in addition to creating these crossings. So we've seen this as a nationwide movement, protecting everything from the Yosemite toad and a salamander in Vermont to ocelots in Texas and, all kinds of ungulates, especially in the West, where those migrations present a real danger to motorists, as well as white-tailed deer on the East Coast. Also, a lot of vehicle collisions that make it both an economic issue for humans and a public safety issue.
Yeah, if your car hits a bison, it's not the bison you have to worry about.
Well, a deer, let alone a moose, right? So there's U.S. infrastructure money that is still available for this. It's one of the few conservation issues that's really moving forward at this point in time. And I think it's because of the public safety component. Meanwhile, some of the earliest and most extensive efforts were in the Netherlands, in France, in Canada. The Banff Wildlife Overpass is famous. It was one of the early ones. So, whether it's crossings, corridors, buying and protecting land in between protected parks, or whether it's working with landowners or farmers to allow wildlife to use some of their land, in kind of cooperative easements that they economically benefit from. There's a lot of ways to do this, and it's all being done. And indigenous communities are deeply involved, and it's an amazing 21st century conservation paradigm that's really making a difference. We have a story coming out in Manga Bay shortly by Ben Goldfarb, who wrote a book on crossings. Brilliant journalist. That's a really powerful story on this topic. And it's just one of many that will be coming out on wildlife corridors as part of the series that we're working on at Manga Bay.
I think there's something very poetic in the concept of it, because not only are we like connecting pieces of land together, like habitat with habitat, but that's also, I feel like you have to connect the communities together, right? You have to connect expertises, right? You have to connect the ecologists and the biologists with the civic engineers and the city planners. And like, you have to connect so many different levels of knowledge together that I think it's not only is it physically connecting land together, but it's also at a more symbolic level, bringing people together. And also humans just have this innate sort of drive to make life more convenient for their kitties. Because they'll be like, oh yeah, build this 10-lane highway. But once they're like, wait a second, there's a cat out there that needs to cross this highway, because you see people that build like cat towers and they build shelf systems and stuff so that their cats can climb around their houses. Gosh, the things that people can pull together to accomplish when there's a cat who needs our help.
Look, there definitely are the cat people. I'm one. I have a cat and 2 dogs. But, there are many people that don't really think about wildlife. So I think it's really important to approach important issues from every point of view. And that includes everything, again, from conservation to public safety. And I really appreciate the fact that you raise the cooperation aspect of this. It takes everybody. And, looking at what Beth Pratt had to do to get that overpass built, it was really obvious at the groundbreaking some years ago on Earth Day when the governor was there. Congressmen, federal legislators, state legislators, donors were there. There was an indigenous leader. There were representatives from local communities, the mayor, citizens. There were people from nonprofits who were working on this initiative. And as well as you noted, engineers, biologists, construction crews, people that would not be in the same room together. And one thing that was really wild about doing these trips with Beth and a couple of other people, Renee Callahan and Marta Brockie, we're on the side of a road, who knows where, big highway, small highway, trucks whizzing past. And, we're in our construction vests and often had to have noise canceling earplugs because it was really loud, and the number of vehicles whizzing by. And then we'd go have a conversation again with an engineer, with a biologist, and everybody was so excited. Everybody who's involved in this, it doesn't matter what their background is, it makes us feel good. We're repairing the damage.
It does feel like you're righting a wrong. It feels like a very physical and tangible way that you can make the world a little nicer.
It is amazing. And I don't see any other global initiative having the impact that reconnecting landscapes is having. And in some situations, in some areas where it's appropriate, there's also rewilding going on, bringing, species back in places they've disappeared or where numbers have really dropped. So, yeah, this is a big step forward.
Oh, that's amazing. Sharon, for people who want to take their own step forward and maybe want to learn more from you and see more of your work, you do have a new book coming out. Could you tell people more about your book?
Well, Steve has covered big cats for more than 20 years. I've done work on broader topics, climate change, zoonotic diseases that hop between species, including animal to human, environmental health issues, energy, fracking, on and on. But most of my work has been wildlife and ecosystems, and I've done a lot of big cat work too. But Steve, he's the big cat dude.
He's narrowed his focus.
Yes, he did. And so this book comes out from National Geographic on October 6th. It's 280 pages. There are 170 of Steve's photos. I wrote 20,000 words of text, and the narrative spine of this book is impact. How do you make a difference? So we picked 9 different stories that we worked on and discussed what the issues were, what it was like for Steve in the field producing these, because he spends a lot of time out on the ground in the field, setting up camera traps and working on these stories. And I think it's 7 species, 6. Let's see, it's snow leopards, cougars, leopards, tigers, African lions, Asian lions, and then there's a chapter each on the Tiger Temple and U.S. tigers. So there's 9 chapters, and these are 9 stories of how our work can make a difference. And of course, Steve's pictures are stunning. It's available for pre-order, she said. But I think we all need inspiration all the time. That's the world that I want to live in. I couldn't do my work without experts sharing their knowledge with me and giving me access to landscapes they work in and data that they've collected, without conservationists, without local people opening their doors and their lives to us. So I feel it's really important for us all to help each other all the time. And that can take a lot of different forms, but one really important aspect of that is inspiration. We need to give each other hope, and we need to realize that regardless of what our skills are, whether, it's photography, or accounting, or writing, or fundraising, public speaking, whatever your particular skill is, there's something that you can do to make a difference.
A lot of people get in touch with me saying, oh, I have this drive, I have this interest, I want to be a part of this, I want to be involved, but I'm not a scientist, I'm not a biologist, I'm not an ecologist, what do I do? And so I do think that is really important that people know that it takes everybody. It takes every type of skill. It takes every type of expertise. There's a place for you in conservation.
Well, not just conservation, and making the world a better place, right?
Yeah. Something that we talk a lot about when we talk about conservation issues is that the human element of it is also very important. Improving circumstances for people will also allow them to be better stewards of their environment too. So the rising tide lifts all ships. Something we say a lot on this.
Yep. And that's a perfect expression. And, for people that want guidance on how to get involved, find something that you really care about, that you're passionate about. And
narrow your focus.
And then find a nonprofit that's doing that work, and really do your research, because there are some nonprofits that either are not having serious on-the-ground impact or are charlatans. And that doesn't just apply to small organizations. There's some large nonprofits that also maybe are taking in a great deal of money, and the impact they have to show for it isn't what it should be. So I would urge people to do your research, find someone that you can work with, for, volunteer for, whatever it is, and dig in, because we can all make a difference.
Absolutely. Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your motivation and sharing your inspiration and your knowledge and expertise. In addition to your wild stories, your incredible stories of getting to travel all over the world and, be a part of these stories that had such huge impacts on the world, and stories that actually contributed to making the world a better and safer place for people and animals. Thank you so much, not just for the work that you do, but for sharing it with us. It has been absolutely incredible. I hope it has inspired somebody to make their own next steps into, getting involved and getting out there.
Ellen, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk about this work, because again, we need to reach audiences in whatever way we can at this point in time. And we all need to be involved. And I'm very grateful for you putting voices out there that can drive impact.
Well, thanks for being one of those voices, and thank you for your impact. Sharon, it was awesome to talk to you. I had an absolute blast. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for listening. I hope that hearing about some of the great work that's being done in conserving nature and wildlife has inspired something in you. If you liked what you heard, I would love it if you left behind some kind words for us in a review on your podcast app of choice. If you want to come hang out with us online, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Discord, Blue Sky. Links to everything will be in the episode description. You can also send me an email at ellen@justthezooofus.com if you have a cool animal you'd like to hear us talk about on the show. We would like to thank Maximum Fun for having us on their network alongside the other amazing shows like the ones that you heard promos for earlier during this episode. If you want to go check those out, learn more about how the network and how you can be a part of supporting our show over at MaximumFun.org. Finally, we would like to thank Louis Zong for our theme music. That's all for today. We'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.
Maximum Fun, a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows.
Supported
directly
by you.